And with that, I give you Sir Ken Robinson.
Thank you, Renee. Good evening. And thank you for reading out my resume. I hear it quite often. I have my children read it out every morning. It's important, I feel, that your children are humbled in your presence. The thing is, you see, well, firstly, thank you for the invitation. And can I back up Renee's call for you all to join the Squaw Creek Institute, the Squaw Valley Institute, without which I wouldn't be here. But the thing is, it's a bit of an odd thing I'm here at all, really. I'm not from here. I'm from Liverpool, in England. And I was born there and went to school there. It made more sense rather than coming here every day, you know. And when I was at school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I really didn't. I didn't have a plan. I didn't think, well, if it all goes according to plan, one day I'll be at the Squaw Valley Institute, hanging out with all of you. This was not even a distant thought. I used to go to folk clubs, you know, in the 1960s. I have a checkered past, you ought to know this. And I used to sing songs like The Leaving of Liverpool, which, among other things, talked about going to California, round the Cape and Santiago. I also, at the age of 16, I was singing songs about, you know, all the sea shanties about giving up whiskey and wild women. I have given up whiskey, as it turns out. But I was 16, I hadn't been out of Liverpool. I mean, the idea I was turning my back on my wild ways, you know, I hadn't even gone to college yet, which was part of the course. In fact, one of the people we had singing at the club I used to go to was Paul Simon. This is in the early 60s, or mid-60s. The place where I lived, it was a railway station, and he wrote Homeward Bound on that particular railway platform, which gives you some idea what the place was like, because he sat on there and wrote this song about being depressed. And now we couldn't wait to get out of the place. And wished he was homeward bound, which he turned out to be eventually. I liked French at school. Actually, I liked the French teacher, Mr. Evans. It's a long story, but and the law was different, you know. But, and I liked Latin. I loved Latin at school, and we have, they're called A-levels in Britain. You see, you can leave school at 16 in England, which is a good idea, I think. I really do feel this, you know, since I moved to America. I live here now, by the way, let me make this clear. I've just popped over here from Liverpool to have a go. We live here, actually in Los Angeles, and we have green cards. We do. So we are resident aliens. It's true, we are moving among you. And being mistaken for one of your own. And my daughter's just become a citizen. And we're applying for citizenship. And I would have applied before now, were it not for jury duty. It's so annoying, isn't it, really? They don't want me on the jury. I was just convicted in the first 5 minutes. Can I go now, please? We live here now, and we love it here. But, you know, there are some things that, which you know, it can be a bumpy transition from Liverpool. Actually, before this, we lived in Stratford-on-Avon. I mean, there were certain things, for example, we were given a book by our relocation agent called How to Behave in America. We were a cultural guide. It's quite a thin book, actually. It's not. It runs to several volumes. But big print and lots of pictures. We were told things like, for example, Americans don't like to be hugged. Is that true? No. Of course not. We thought it was. It's one of those cultural myths, like the British are reserved. No, we're not. I don't know where you got this idea from, really. I mean, we've invaded every country we've encountered. We've tried to dominate every culture we've come across. Why you think we're holding back, I don't know. You should be more assertive. Really? Are you sure about that? So we were told Americans don't like to be hugged. Not true, is it? Cultural myth. So when we first arrived, we were going to these events and we refused to touch anybody. I was there with my son and our daughter Kate and my wife Terry, and the four of us were lined up, you know, at these social occasions, with our arms clamped to our sides. I'm saying, don't touch anybody, don't touch anybody, they don't like it. We're like this, we're like refugees from Riverdance. And you can see people thinking, oh, that's that British Reserve thing. The point I'm making in these two things are, you know, firstly, I never expected to be here. And secondly, even though when you move to another country, you feel you know it, particularly if it's an English-speaking country, which you almost are. It's so close to English you'd hardly notice it. Why do you think we invented the letter U? To go in words like colour. Winston Churchill told me, actually my wife's writing a book at the moment. She's published her first book 2 years ago, and she's now writing the sequel. It's amazing how many words are different when you move to America. You must find this when you go to England. People speak, look at you as if you're speaking Swahili. Like, we just tried to order a couple of, what we call it now? Bedside tables. The shop had no idea what we're talking about. Nightstands. Right? It's obvious things like sidewalks and pavements. But the first time we went to a shop here, a store, we asked for a tin of tomatoes, and the poor woman behind the counter thought we were invading her, and she said, you know what happens, when people don't understand you properly, you just speak louder, don't you? So we ended up shouting at her, tin of tomatoes. And eventually the man came over and said, I think they want a can of tomatoes. So what I'm saying, there are these cultural filters, and it takes you a while to get your eye in. Because what culture amounts to are things you take for granted as being completely obvious. So the two things I'm trying to get to here. Firstly, I didn't know, growing up in Liverpool, what my life was going to be like. See, when people read out your resume, as Renee kindly did, and as I will again in a moment, you know, just to remind you of the tremendous privilege that you're now experiencing. It all adds up to a kind of fiction. I mean, the fiction is that your life is linear, and you can plan it. Well, of course you can't. Every human life is a constant process of improvisation, isn't it? I mean, let me ask you, how many of you here correctly anticipated, I mean, I'm talking about those of you who are 30 and under, not you over here. How many of you correctly anticipated when you were 15 at school the life you've gone on to actually lead? No. It's not very impressive, is it? And the reason you can't, or you didn't, is because you can't. It's not a fault. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And your life is a conversation between your circumstances, your temperament, your dispositions, and your talents, and whether or not you discover them. And out of it, you make a life. And there comes a point where you have to give an account of yourself, and so you write it all down on 2 sides of paper. And it's very selective. You put in key dates, don't you? You put certain headings in bold or italic. The things you're proud of, that are relevant to the person you're trying to impress. You leave out all the things that you'd prefer to forget. And it's like watching the edited highlights of a sports game. You see all the goals, but none of the dribbling. All the stuff that actually made up the rest of the time. And you do this because you want to convey to people that your life has been a well-ordered trajectory according to a preset plan. What you don't want to do is to convey to people the actual chaos that you've been living through. The restless process of improvisation, decisions you take, choices you made, opportunities you decided to grasp and ones you turned away from. Bits of yourself that you decided not to explore much further, or things you gave into because of fear of failure, or things that you did decide to go to because you thought, well, why not? But the result of it is that every person on Earth, now and who has ever lived, has a unique resume. Every life is different. Nobody in history has ever lived your life, and nobody ever will. And you don't know how the rest of it's going to play out either. I mean, you might in a general way say, well, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a designer, or I want to be a poet, or I want to be an engineer, or whatever, I want to be a homemaker. You might do that, you might set a path, but this life, these people, this place, I guess an awful lot of you weren't born in this area, and you're here now, and have made a life here. It's just the way. And the second thing is that when people get together, so we create our lives, when people get together, they create a common life to some degree. Which is what we mean by culture. You create a common way of doing things, a common way of behaving, a set of values, a set of conventions that mark you out as this sort of place. And so I'm sure you find it. When you moved here, there were things that were appropriate here that weren't quite the same as where you moved from. There are broad plans, but you know what I'm saying. And the point is that human beings are inevitably, inherently, inexorably creative. And when we create things together, we create a culture. And the cultures are as different in a way as our individual lives are, that we buy into. And all this matters because education, as it's evolved over the past 150 years or so, is based on exactly the opposite set of principles. It's based on the idea of linearity, that you can plan what people's lives are going to be like. And if you doubt that, you've only got to look at the way the curriculum gets organised, how it gets narrowed. Some things are put in and some things are left out of the school curriculum, and they're there partly because of a sense of utility. We think, well, we need more of this because we need more of those people. President Obama and President Bush before him both have talked about the importance of education to solving America's economic problems. And they both talk about the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. Don't get me wrong, they're really important. I have nothing to say against the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math. They are necessary in education, but they're not sufficient. That when we talk about these things, it gives the message out to people who may or may not be interested in them, that other disciplines in schools are not as important. So if you happen to be interested in social studies, or the arts, or phys ed, the message is, you're not very important right now. We have a national crisis, and we need the scientists and the technologists to sort this out, and the mathematicians. And when they've figured it all out, we'll call you. In the meantime, you can sit this one out. You see, I find it fascinating. I had a conversation with a group of the students here earlier. They're all very different. They've all got very different interests. They're all heading for very different lives. Some in sport, some in social areas, some in science, some in the arts. And that's the case because, like any other group of human beings, they're diverse and different. But our education systems are based on this idea of linearity. So you'll hear people, politicians say, we must fix the STEM systems because that's how we'll overcome overseas competition. And it's not true. It's just not true. It's a myth, like the British are reserved, or the Americans don't like to be hugged, but we believe it because it's been said so often. We buy into all kinds of myths like this. And one of the consequences is that we are miseducating whole swathes of this generation, just as you were miseducated before you, not intentionally. I don't blame anybody for this. I'm not saying it's somebody's fault. I'm saying it's in the system. It's systemic. That's how it works. When I got to the end of my high school years, I met my careers teacher. And I only met him once. That was enough for me. And he said, what do you like doing? What are you good at? And I said, well, I like French and I like Latin. And he looked rather thoughtful, and English, by the way. I always liked English. I was good at English. I still am, as you can see. And I thought, and he said, so, what do you think of doing next? I said, I'm not sure, that's why I'm here. I'd welcome your advice. So he looked thoughtful for a bit, and he said, have you thought of dentistry? I said, curiously, no. And he said, no. No, that hadn't come up. And because I have no interest in it, except when it's being done to me. And then he said, okay, well, he said, and I'm not making this up, he said, how about accountancy? Well, I was terrible at math. It wasn't my thing at all. I didn't like maths at school. I mean, I'm not against mathematics, I couldn't do it. Obviously it was the teacher's fault. How could it be mine? Think about it, really. No, it was incompetent, clearly. But no, actually for a while I thought my daughter had inherited the family indisposition for maths, that she'd got the gene, and then she couldn't do calculus. But because when she was at elementary school, my daughter's now 24, but when she was in elementary school, she thought I knew everything. One of the drags about having children, let's be clear about this, there are many wonderful things about having children, like children, but one of the drags is that you have to go back to school with them, don't you? Just when you think you're done with the whole thing, you go back and they start breaking their homework too. So Kate, when she was at elementary school, kept bringing me homework and she thought I knew everything. And I was very keen to encourage this impression for a while. It was fine for a while. She would hand me pages of simple addition. When she was when she was 5 and 6. And I would look at this stuff and I would cut through this like a math god. She'd say to me things like, Dad, what's 7 and 8? I couldn't even look up from the newspaper. I said, Kate, it's 15. And she'd look at me and think, how does he do it? I said, it's a gift. I said, I can't even take responsibility, to be honest, Kate. I'm channeling the higher power. I'm simply a vehicle through which mathness is passing. And it was all great for a while. And then she went to high school. And she came home with a page full of quadratic equations. And I felt the old familiar panic attack. So I introduced learning by discovery methods. I said, Kate, there's no point in me telling you the answer. This is not how we learn. No, you have to work this out for yourself. That way you'll remember it and develop your lesson skills. As you're outside having gin and tonic. And even when you've got the answer, there's no point showing it to me. teachers are for. And I have no wish to undermine their authority. So by these means, we survived. And anyway, a few months later, she came home with a cartoon strip. I forget where she got it now, but we still have it. And there are 3 frames, so this is for you. And the first, it's a father helping a daughter with homework. In the first frame, the father saying to the daughter, "What have you got to do?" And the daughter said, "I've got to find the lowest common denominator." And the father said, "Are they still looking for that?" So they were trying to find that when I was at school. I said, "Exactly." I personally found it on several occasions, and it's been mislaid again, so I don't know. So there is this sense of utility, that's the point. And so when we moved here, we saw all these similarities, some differences, some similarities. I say, when you're in school in England, you can leave at 16. Here, of course, you have to carry on. What you can do with that, and I'm not comparing this favourably in every respect, is that when you're in England, when you get to 16, if there are things you don't like doing quite as much, you can drop them and do things you really like doing and focus on. That seems to me to make sense. Whereas in high schools in America, you have to do everything, right the way, don't you, to the bitter end. So when my son got here, he just managed to complete his math exams in England and thought he's done with it because he would have been in England. And he had to do it for another 2 years. Now, I just want to underline this. I'm not speaking in criticism of mathematics. Some of the most brilliant people I know are mathematicians, and some of the most creative. Absolutely. One of the people I used to work with at Warwick University was a professor of pure mathematics. And I said to him, "How do you assess a PhD in pure mathematics?" First I said, "How long are they?" Because in the humanities, we had a word length, it's 80,000 words. That's important. I used to supervise doctoral dissertations in the humanities. It's important to have a limit. It is. No, it really is. People have to be stopped. Or they just keep writing. I said, "No. 80,000 words and we're breaking the pencil. And I'm not listening to any more of this." 80,000 words on the French subjunctive in the 18th century. No, we're done. This is more than anybody needs to know about it. So I said, "How long are they?" He said, "Well, I saw one recently said it was 26 pages of math. Pure math. 26 pages of math. I mean, hard math, obviously. We're talking remainders and things like that. Things you don't know what to be doing with." I said, "Well, how do you judge one?" He said, there are 2 criteria. He said, the first thing is originality. It has to break new ground. In other words, it's how creative it is. But the second I loved, and by the way, this is an important point. You can be creative in anything. It's not just the arts. You can be creative in math, science, technology, engineering, all of them. Anything that involves your intelligence, you can be creative. So he said it's originality. It has to break new ground. By the way, it doesn't have to break new ground in everything. It doesn't have to break new ground in cuisine. It doesn't have to be an original contribution to modern jazz, or to rock and roll. It just has to be an original contribution to the field in which it's being considered, whichever field of mathematics that is. That's really important. We judge creativity according to its value in the field. But the second thing I loved, he said it's aesthetic. I said, why does that matter? He said, because there's a very strong feeling among mathematicians that mathematics is the purest way we have of describing the truths of nature. And since nature is inherently beautiful, there's a very strong feeling among mathematicians that the more elegant the proof, the more likely it is to be true. It's an informal test of truth. If it's a kind of ugly thing, it just doesn't feel right. Isn't that interesting? It just doesn't feel right. It could be talking about a dance, a poem, a painting, or a piece of architecture. Aesthetics is one of the great drivers of human achievement. A sense of beauty and value and appropriateness. And it's as true in mathematics, in physics, in chemistry, as it is in poetry and dance. One of the great mistakes we make in education is we make arbitrary distinctions between the arts and sciences as if they're completely different and unconnected. And it's a very recent historical idea that we do this. Most of the artists I know are deeply disciplined people. You watch anybody learning to play a violin or a guitar or any instrument or to perform a dance, it's a highly crafted, disciplined, objective process. It's a complete myth to think that artists go around in a constant emotional turmoil. I just have to bash this stuff out and go and get drunk. Often they get drunk beforehand. And it's also wrong to believe that scientists are all white-coated, bloodless, automatons. They're simply not. They're driven by passions for what they do. Now, I don't want to caricature all of them, I'm saying, but the distinction is too easy to make and it's mistaken. So, education is based on this idea of linearity. It's based on also the idea of conformity. That our job is to get kids to learn what's on offer, and they have to fit themselves to the system. When in the rest of our lives we try and find a life that fits to us. And the last thing is that education is based on uniformity, when real life is based on diversity. And because we have such a narrow view of intelligence and ability in schools, we've invented a very broad conception of deviance and disability to account for it. Can I ask you two questions? How many of you have got children of your own? Or grandchildren? Okay. Well, and the rest of you have seen such children, presumably. I'll make you a bet. If you've got 2 children or more, I bet you they are completely different from each other, aren't they? You'd never confuse them, would you? Would you? Like, which one are you? Remind me. I don't mean they're not alike in some respects. Of course, they're family and they'll share certain characteristics. But they're also unique individuals with their own talents and interests. I've got 2 kids, they're chalk and cheese in some respects. They love each other. In some ways, they're very similar. I've got 5, 6 siblings, and we couldn't be more different in many respects. We have different paths through life, we've done different things. Diversity is at the heart of real human flourishing. Let me ask you the question. How many of you here are baby boomers? Go on, you can admit it, it's proud of you. Well, look, how many of you are younger? How many of you are 30 or younger? Go on. Yeah, younger than 30, all right. You are, How many of you baby boomer types have had your tonsils removed? Interesting, isn't it? Have a look around. How many of you people under 30 have had your tonsils removed? Now, let me point this out. If you ask a room full of teenagers if they've had their tonsils out, very few have. Ask a room full of baby boomers and most of the room has. Now, there's a reason for this. In the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up, it was routine, wasn't it, to have your tonsils taken out. The first sign of a sore throat. So pants on you and take your tonsils out. Didn't it? And often as not, your adenoids as well. In fact, any bit of loose flesh, they won't have it. They just rip it out. I know people who had their tonsils taken out not because they had a sore throat, but because their sibling did. Isn't that right? No, we'll take ours out while they're here. It'll save you coming back. And some people volunteer to have their tonsils taken out because you got free ice cream for a week. When I was growing up, you couldn't afford to clear your throat in public. Or somebody would grab you around the neck and take your tonsils out. Millions of tonsils were taken out in the baby rooms. What happened to all the tonsils? We need to know. This is one of those Area 51 things. Somewhere there's a great stockpile of unused tonsils. The thing is, you see, kids these days do not have their tonsils taken out. I don't mean they never do, but it's unusual. They only have them taken out in critical cases. For the rest, they're given some antibiotics or told to go home and rest for a bit. But for our generation, it was routine. And the reason is not because we are biologically different or we've evolved in some other way, it's because it was a medical fad. It was a fashion. Doctors were paid to do it. It became the orthodoxy. They thought, okay, let's take it out. We don't need these tonsils. Actually, it turns out it wasn't as simple and straightforward for some people as it appeared to be. It could actually be rather a dangerous operation. We weren't told that. And it turns out the tonsils do all kinds of interesting things. I mean, the body's pretty economical. On the whole, we don't grow bits just for the hell of it. You know? And you find out quite early on what the different bits are for, don't you? You do. You don't get to your 40s and actually, what is that for? I have no idea. What's that? Have you got one of these? What are you doing with it? Did I borrow yours for the weekend and see how it works out? You don't. It was a medical fad. Medicine's moved on, and now it's treated differently, and our children, as a consequence, don't suffer from a plague of tonsillectomies. It was a false epidemic, completely unnecessary. This generation suffers from a different epidemic. Equally false, I believe, but it's gone into the orthodox. It's become part of the culture of education we take for granted. I mean the epidemic of ADHD. Now look, I'm not saying there's no such thing as ADHD. I wouldn't be qualified to say that. But I speak a lot to therapists, to doctors, to psychologists, and it's a very shady area, this. What I mean is that ADHD, you know, people agree there is some genuine condition somewhere here in the middle. People have a real problem concentrating on anything. And for them, some forms of medication may be helpful. But you know, it's a set of dispositions and situational factors where it shows itself. It's not like malaria. You know, like, you've got it. Here it is, it's right here in the blood test. Your body is swarming with ADHD. It's not like that. You know, it's at best, it's a subjective assessment of people who lose interest in things or get agitated and want to do something else and they keep moving direction. And it's often, by the way, based on a pretty cursory assessment. Because time is short, you know, people get busy. And it's one of those things, if you seem to show it, then you've got it. Now, I'm not saying it's not there in any form at all, but I do think we should rule out all forms of explanation other than medication first. I mean, for example, I often ask people who say their kids have got ADHD, or kids who say they've got it, what they love to do. And it can be anything. They say, oh, well, you know, she or she, you know, they love writing, or they love reading, or they love working with animals, or doing computer programs, or playing the guitar, and whatever it is, any of the multiple things that human beings get up to. Whatever it is they love. And I said, well, do they have trouble focusing then? And one is, oh no, they'll do it for hours. We think, well, does this have to explain something? You know, if you sit students down, young people, at a desk for 8 hours a day, more or less, doing boring things, well, don't be surprised if they get bored. You know, in my 20s, in Liverpool, I went round an abattoir, you know, a slaughterhouse, and I can't remember why I went there. I think I was taking a girl out, you know. I know how to treat a woman, you know. Come with me to the slaughterhouse, you know. Before we have dinner, let's see where it came from. No, I went around. Actually, 2 of my brothers are vegan. That was the thing. So, you know, we were doing a kind of project on it. So anyway, I went round. You know, a slaughterhouse is designed with a single purpose, which is to slaughter animals. And it works. It actually does it, you know, very efficiently. Very few of them escape. You know, they don't organise survivors clubs and annual reunions and talk about the old days, you know, when they got out of the slaughterhouse, how they dug their way out. I mean, it doesn't happen. And it's very efficient. Anyway, I was going around this place, and I got to the end of the tour, and the guy showed me around. As we were going out, there was a door near the end of the facility, and it said veterinarian. And I thought, well, it's a bit late, isn't it? A bit late now to be having second thoughts. I said, why do you have a veterinarian? He said, oh, well, he comes in every week and does random autopsies. I thought, well, he must have seen a pattern by now, surely. I mean, you know, another 1,000 cows with holes in their head. There's something happening in here. Something's happening. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I can't believe this is a coincidence. No, it's not. The thing is, if you design a system with certain features to do something, don't be surprised if it does it. And our current systems of education were designed in the 19th century to meet the needs of industrialism, and they're predicated on a very narrow view of ability, as a result of which we've invented a very large conception of disability to deal with it, to account for deviance. And of course, the narrower the conception comes, the bigger the penumbra gets. You know, just for this quickly, when talking to the students earlier, I got polio when I was 4, and I was talking to Cody in the group about this. And I went into special education. You know, do you remember there were these big polio epidemics in the 50s? I didn't like to be left out, frankly. I was not so popular. So the groovy people over here in the hospital. So anyway, I got this, and I was when I came out of hospital, I came out a year later. By the way, I was tremendously cute, I have to say. No, really. I was wearing 2 braces. I had crutches, a wheelchair, long curly hair, and a lisp. Come on. People spontaneously gave me money in the street. They did. Which my brother hung on to, as I recall. So I went to this school for there were bad euphemisms in the 60s, the 50s. It was called it was the Margaret School for the Physically Handicapped. Just so we're clear what was happening here. And there was a school down the street which is a school for the mentally handicapped. I mean, we've thought better of these terms now, but the school I was at, there were people there, a lot of people with polio, in different bits of them, you know, and some people had kind of gangly arms, some had got their legs, and you know, of course if it affects your chest muscles, then you can't breathe, so you're in an iron lung. But there were people with cerebral palsy. The guy I sat next to at school for a year could only write with his foot. And he wrote better than I did, actually, with his foot. Is that handwriting? We don't know. You know, the thing with cerebral palsy is it affects your control of your muscles, because your body starts fighting itself. So, you know, you get this kind of awkward, kind of spasmodic movement. And of course, if it affects your facial muscles, it's very hard to speak, because you use dozens of muscles to frame a sentence. So, but the consequence is, when people have this condition, it's easy for somebody else to think that they aren't thinking clearly, because they can't express themselves clearly. Mm-hmm. There were people there who had heart conditions, not spina bifida. They hadn't a cure for that at the time, so people didn't survive that. Anyway, there were people in all kinds of various states of disarray, you know, in my classroom. I used to say that, actually, that my classroom at this school was like the barroom scene from Star Wars. You know, they were wandering around with various bits dropping off, you know, and people being brought in installments and assembled in front of the class. But the thing is, you see, none of that interested any of us in the class or in the school. What we were interested in was whether people were interesting or not, whether they were funny or engaging or had something to say or not. In other words, we never looked at their disability. We looked at what they could do, not what they couldn't do. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? I mean, if you look at people in the Special Olympics now, I mean, these people are fantastic. And you don't think, well, they can't do that, can they? Yeah, but look what they can do. Look what they can do. So what I'm saying is that what's happening in education is if you have a very narrow conception of ability, you start pathologizing people who aren't particularly good at that or don't demonstrate it. And so instead of looking at what people are good at, you become preoccupied with what they can't do, and so they become disabled as a consequence. It's a cultural veil that we put across human possibility, and it blinds people to their own possibilities as well as blinding us to them. So we have a view of a system of education predicated on a very narrow view of ability. It's based on conformity and it's based on the idea of linearity. And there are wonderful schools all around the world. There are great teachers, great head teachers, great school leaders. But the dominant culture of education belongs to another time. So when I talk about the need for a revolution, what I'm arguing for is that we should recognise that life is creative, it's organic, and it's based on diversity, and not the opposite. And you can't predict what these kids are going to go on to do with their lives any more than anybody can predict the life you went on to. And we need forms of education which recognise that, and don't behave as if it's not true. My son James went to USC, University of Southern California, which is a private university. When we got here, it wasn't eligible for the public sector. And private, as you know, is a synonym for expensive. And we hadn't grasped that when we came here. So James went, and the first day at USC, the students were let off for an academic briefing, while the parents were taken to the finance department for what proved to be a form of grief counselling. As we were initiated into the extraordinary burden that we just agreed to take on. We had a practical workshop. We spent the afternoon tearing up cheques, till it didn't hurt. It was like a form of aversion therapy. Anyway, at the end of it, we had this great professor who said to us, now your kids here, try and spare them your advice. So they're going to find out things about themselves that they don't know yet and that you don't know. So he gave the example of his own son, who when he first went to USC wanted to do classics. And he said, my wife and I were really worried that we'd never get a job with a classics degree. So we were thrilled at the end of the first year when he came back and said, Dad, I'm not going to do classics, I don't think it's going to be much use. He said, so what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to do something more practical. He said, what's that? He said, philosophy. He said, so we pointed out to him that none of the big philosophy firms were hiring. International Existentialist Inc. Consolidated Nicholas. He said that we ended up doing art history. He said, but if I tell you that he now works in an international auction house, he travels the world, trading in fine art and antiques, he loves the life he has, he admires the people he works with, and he's passionate about the objects he trades. He makes good money and is delighted with the way his life is evolving. And he got the job because of his knowledge of ancient cultures, his understanding of art history, and the intellectual training he received from studying philosophy for a couple of years. It ideally suited him to the position. In fact, it opened his eyes to the position when it came up. It's Joseph Campbell's thing, that unless you're aware of what lies inside you, you don't see what's around you. And sometimes doors open where previously you'd seen a brick wall, not because it's changed, but because your vision has changed of yourself. But you see, what's interesting is it doesn't work the other way around, does it? It wouldn't have worked. You can't imagine at the beginning of his time at USC if this kid had been sitting there with his parents and they said, look, your mother and I have been talking about this. And here's the plan. We think you should do art history, philosophy, and classics. And you never know. Some job may come up in a field we've never heard of, with an organisation that's not yet been formed. It's worth a shot. Give it a go, let's see, and And if we're wrong, we'll apologise. So it doesn't work that way. So these principles have always applied to human life. I think it's become more important now than ever that we reshape our education systems around them. And I just quickly want to tell you why. Firstly, we are living in times of revolution, and I mean this quite literally. But there are challenges that we face now on Earth which are without precedent. I published a book 10 years ago called Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative. Let me show you a picture of this book. No, it's wrong. Let's go back. Yeah, no. There. Please erase the other images from your mind. Out of our minds. Now then, for those of you who only have Kindles or iPads, let me explain, this is not the actual book. This is a picture of a book. The actual book is very much smaller than this, and therefore more convenient to carry around. Do not be deterred by the size of this. So the original came out 10 years ago, and the publisher contacted me and said, we'd like to bring out a new edition of the book 10 years on. We're going to give new artwork, a bit of hardcover, and he asked me if I'd like to make any changes to the text. Well, it seemed to me improbable that it could be improved. It was, after all, a masterwork. Composed myself, but I said I'd take a look at it. What I had in mind was a weekend with a spell check and a bottle of Jack Daniels, And I thought under duress I might relocate the occasional semicolon. In the event, I rewrote the entire book from start to finish. It took me 6 months. There are new chapters in the book, new examples, I've updated all the statistics. There isn't a sentence that is unrevised in the entire book. And it's about a fifth longer than the original. So if you bought the original edition of this book, I'm sorry. It's dreadful. So you must immediately buy this new edition, which is terrific. But one reason I changed it was because something just happened in 10 years. Actually, if I think of my life in education since the 70s, I mean, one big driver, when I say it's a revolution, is technology. Think what's happened in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there were no smartphones, no iPads, no iPhones, there were no social media, there was no Facebook 10 years ago, no Pinterest, no Flickr, no Twitter. I mean, 10 years ago, people didn't tweet. Did they? I mean, if they did, they were discouraged. I'm sorry, what was that? Do you mind not doing that? We're in a public place, would you outside if you... But now I don't tweet twice a day, it's some kind of social pariah. It's amazing how quickly this has moved on. When I started in education, nobody had computers. I mean, IBM had a computer. It weighed about 5 tons. And it had about 5 megabytes of RAM. I mean, not enough to have a small video of it. When I started in education in the 70s, we didn't have photocopiers. Do you remember what we had? Now, listen. I need to explain to those of you who are under the age of 40 why half the room has suddenly started doing this. This is not some early onset condition that you're going to What were those things called?
Mimeograph.
Mimeographs. We didn't have photocopiers, and these were mechanical devices, weren't they? Where you had to crank a handle to make a copy. So you make the original on a piece of paper, then you fed it into a drum, turned the handle, and a copy would come out. You had to do one at a time. Each time you cranked the handle, a copy came out. They were purple, weren't they? And it worked through a transfer system, because built into this mechanical device called a mimeograph, wasn't it? There was a reservoir of methylated spirits, which is a high-octane alcohol, which gave off fumes in large clouds. And this thing worked because it soaked the drum in methylated spirits and transferred it onto the copy, which then had to dry, which it did quickly because it vaporized. And these things gave off clouds and clouds of intoxicating fumes. The consequence of this was that throughout the country, during the morning break, school staff rooms were crammed full of teachers, making bogus copies for lessons they had no intention of ever giving, just so they could inhale the fumes from the copy. More meth, they would say. I've got the 9th grade after break. I think these machines had a more profound effect on teaching methods in the 1970s than we give them credit for. As a result of which, we now have no child left behind. You see, the technological revolution hasn't finished. It hasn't started. That's the truth of this, you know. I mean, all these devices that we think are so groovy. By the way, I just got myself an iPhone 5. Friends of mine, my wife and family have been saying to me for years, I was like kind of attached to my BlackBerry. And they said, groovy people do not have BlackBerries. I said, the evidence stands before you that you're wrong. Explain this then, I said. And they said, no. To be at the leading edge of cool, you need an iPhone. Of course, they're right, aren't they? Once you've got an iPhone, there's no going back. Do you know that one of the apps you get, well, firstly, when the iPhone was introduced, there were 800 apps when it was first launched in 2007. There are now 800,000 apps for the iPhone. And most of these were not anticipated by Steve Jobs. One of the apps you get, actually there's a whole series of them you can get on for the iPhone. If you download it, it turns your iPhone into a blues harmonica. Honestly, you turn it on its side and you can suck and blow on the side of your phone. Honestly. And play the Delta Blues. Why? You see, this did not form part of the original design specification at Apple. I can't imagine that Steve Jobs sat down with the design team and Jonathan Ive and said, look, here's the situation. We want to take Nokia down. So we're going to develop a smartphone that's going to beat the world. So here's some things it has to do. You need to be able to get online. You have to be able to text on it. You have to be able to search the internet. Possibly make phone calls, not crucial. Depends if there's room for that type of thing. But don't forget, it's vital that you can play the Delta Blues on this thing, because meetings can be so depressing. And people are going to stumble out of these meetings and they're going to want to play, they're going to want to channel Howling Wolf, play Smokestack Lightning. See, it doesn't happen. What happens is when you get a really interesting idea, it attracts everybody to it, and they come up with really interesting ideas too, based on the original one. It's like rock and roll. It just happened. Rock and roll was not a government plan. I can't even, well, I know it wasn't true. It was not the case that a group of culture ministers sat round from the States and say, look, we've got this idea for a new form of music that we think will keep people occupied. Jenkins here has come up with 3 chords that we think we can do something with. And we've drafted out some hairstyles and costumes that we think people might want to go for. Jenkins, if you wouldn't mind. No, this didn't happen. What happened was that this idea came up and it was compulsive and it took the world over. Like the iPhone. It's compulsive and it took the world over. That's how ideas really spread. So, this isn't over by a long way. This is probably the next thing that's going to happen. We're going to have devices that you wear. This is Google Glass. I have to say, between you and me, in the private company of our own space, I think it's a terrible idea. But what she's doing is, what she's able to do is control that computer that's above her right eye by moving her eyes. So she can go online, she can flick it, she can say, I want to find a restaurant, and it'll impose restaurants over a map that will appear just like 11 inches in front of her face. I saw Sergey Brin from Google demonstrate this. He's thrilled with it. It was very interesting because he was saying, the thing is, with the conventional phone, you've got to take it out of your pocket. You know what a drag that is, You've got to fiddle with it, touch the keyboard. I mean, really, it's like a form of impression, isn't it? He said, but with this, you just flick your eyes, and when we're all wearing it, you know what'll happen. It'll be possible wearing these things. You could meet somebody, and while you're chatting, you can access their Facebook page and see what's going on. Don't you think it's terrible? I like, if I'm talking to people, I want to be able to look them in the eye, not like 11 inches in front of them. But anyway, it'll happen, because it can. So this is one horizon, but the real one is not this. It's something that people like Ray Kurzweil call the singularity. The singularity is the point not far away where we will merge with information systems. It sounds a bit bonkers, but here's not going to be exactly like this, but if you don't take my word for it, go online, check out the singularity, and you'll see that serious scientists are anticipating, with the growth of nanotechnology and improvements in cognitive sciences, that we will eventually merge with information systems and maybe be able to enhance our own intelligence in a certain way through these systems. Already, there are interfaces that require no physical contact, where you can operate programs just with the power of thought. Now you see, it all sounds a bit bonkers, as I say, but I'd rather like this as an image to try and capture it. But robotics, it's on its way. Actually, there's a whole area now of debate in ethics about the evolution of conscious machines. If machines, as they seem likely to in the relatively near future, become capable of decision-making, of communication, in some ways they'll be indistinguishable from human beings. So the question arises, do they have rights? Would robots have rights? I followed a very interesting debate about this, and I said, well, of course they would, because they're capable of independent choice. They have rights. The only reason we give them to people at the moment is because we're the people coming up with the rights. And they said, actually, ethically, there's no difference between a machine intelligence and an intelligence based in flesh and blood. And they said to say otherwise, I've just never come across the term before, so to say otherwise is simple fleshism. Just a thought. Here's the other big driver. Can I ask you a question? How many people do you think have ever lived on the Earth? What number comes to your mind?
10 billion.
Think of a number, what?
10 billion.
10 billion, thank you. Actually, let me pin this down a bit. I'm talking about modern human beings. I'm not about prehistoric creatures that went around on their knuckles, grunting. I'm talking about groovy people. Like us, with attractive profiles and a sense of irony. So, we're thought to have evolved around 150,000 years ago. So how many of us do you think there have been in the last 150,000 years? People like us, with articulate language, social communities, wake up in the morning, worrying about their children, planning the day, living out the arc of their own lives. How many of us do you think there have been? 10 billion, I heard. How many more?
120.
What? 4 billion? 20 billion?
120.
Do I hear 30 billion? Oh, look, let me tell you. That's time is short, let me tell you. Nobody knows, okay? Of course not, they're not been counting since the dawn of time, have we? People wandering around with calculators saying Handler's formula over here. No, but if you Google the question, by the way, and you should, it's what I did, you'll find that serious statisticians are gathering around a figure, and the figure they're coming to, allowing for epidemics and other factors that influence population growth, the figure they're coming to is around 100 billion, maybe 100 billion. The thing is, of that total, almost 10% is on the Earth now. This is the graph of the Earth's population. This line along the bottom, so that should say developed countries, ignore the word less. That's that's the population in the developed economies. America, parts of Asia, and Europe, the old industrial economies. It's interesting, what you'll see is that the population started growing at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It went right up to 2000, it carried on to 2050. But it tails off, and one of the reasons is as populations become more educated, they have fewer children. The renewal rate for a population is 2.1 births per mother, which is clearly an average, isn't it? So, there's David, there's Susan, and the rest of us are going to be along shortly. If people have two children or one or none, of course, you have two, the population doesn't grow, it starts to decline. And most of the millennials are having two. The boomers, for the most part, have two or fewer. So although the population is bound to go up, because of the way the math works out here, it's starting to decline in the developed economies. It's quite possible, according to some projections, that within several generations, for example, we could run out of French people. People take different views of this, of course. But they could get really serious. We could run out of English people. Think about that. Then what will you do? So that's the developed world. But this is the curve of population in the emerging economies. Now it's Russia, most of Asia, the Middle East, and South America. This is how it looks there. The world is tilting on its axis, and we now are approaching 9 billion people by the middle of the century, 10 billion by the end of it. That's more people than have ever lived on Earth at the same time in the history of humanity. And we don't know if the Earth can deal with it. That's the truth. There was a program on the BBC last year about how many people can live on Earth. It was called How Many People Can Live on Earth? They're very good at titles at the BBC. And they came to the conclusion that if everybody on Earth consumed food, fuel, water, as we currently process them and as we currently consume them, if everybody on Earth consumed at the same rate all these things as the average person in Rwanda, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 15 billion people. So halfway there now, 7.3 billion. But if everybody on Earth consumed at the same rate as the average person in North America, that's us, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 1.5 billion. And we're 4 times past that now. So if everybody on the Earth wants to consume these things, eat, drink and so on, consume fuel as we do, and have done for the past several generations, if everybody wanted to do that, by 2050 we'd need 4 more planets to make it work. Well, we don't have them. The risk of pointing out the obvious. And the other thing I just want to draw from this is that all of these challenges are happening because of human beings. They are the result of our remorseless capacity for innovation. Creativity is a natural process for human beings. We can stunt it, we can thwart it, we can inhibit it, but we don't live as other animals do. In most respects we do, but in this respect we don't. We don't live in the world directly. We live in a world of ideas and values. We live in a culture. We invent, we create 6,000 languages that are currently spoken. We invent theories, ideologies, we create music and theatre and scientific proposals. Human beings have an immense power of imagination, and from it flows all the natural capacities of creativity. We create the world that we inhabit, and along the way we create extraordinary cultures. But at the moment, we're creating challenges that we have never before had to face. And education is the key to it. It's the key to our personal flourishing and to our survival, really, and our stewardship of the planet, which is a rather tiny place. There was a very interesting piece in the Onion magazine about we have to save the planet. And they said, don't worry about the planet. The planet's going to be fine. We're here in 6 Peaks, surrounded by a landscape that's billions of years old. It's been being formed at that amount of time. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, as far as we can judge. Human beings have been around for 150,000 years. Hard to get your head around that, but if you think of the whole lifespan of the planet as 1 year, human beings showed up at less than a minute to midnight on the 31st of December. And we've imperiled our own place on the planet. And, the Earth will be fine. It's got another 4.5 billion years to run yet. You can imagine, the Earth concluding, we tried humanity, not so good. The dinosaurs lasted for millions of years. We're going back to bacteria, they were great, they weren't any kind of problem. So we're not endangering the planet, we're endangering ourselves, really. H.G. Wells once said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And there's some truth in that. We have to see further. The future doesn't lie in becoming less creative, it lies in becoming more creative. Looking at new modes of feeding people, of fuel, of making the best of the waters that we have, and so on. Now, I think we have to change metaphors, and this is just what I want to end with. See, the current systems of education are based on an industrial model of mass production. It's not an accident. They were designed in the 19th century to meet the needs of industrial mass production, and they look like that. There are all kinds of things we do in education that don't make sense. For example, we divide the world up into subjects. These are pure conventions. If you wanted to study chemistry in the 19th century, there was no university course where you could do it. It wasn't thought of as a subject. You couldn't study English literature at any university in the English-speaking world in the early 19th century because nobody took it. You couldn't study novels because nobody took them seriously. They were all made up. Sociology wasn't a discipline. Psychology wasn't a discipline until the 20th century. These things come and go, they're just conventions. They come and they go. But we've built our education system on the idea that there are separate subjects and that the arts are separate from the sciences and that intelligence is this particular thing to do an IQ test. And they're all conventions, they're all mutable, and it's about time we did change them. The other thing is that the system of education is based on the linear mode of mass production. So, for example, we divide the school day in high schools into 40-minute or 50-minute bits. If you tried to run your business that way, you'd be broke in a month. If you had 2,000 people in your business, and every 40 minutes they had to stop what they were doing and do something else in a different part of the facility with another group of people, and then rinse and repeat five times a day, you'd be out of business in a month. But we do it in education. It has nothing to do with education or learning. It's just an organisational device. So when I talk about a revolution, I mean we have to rethink it from the ground up. And the metaphor I think we should adopt is an organic metaphor, since we are organic. Human beings flourish under certain conditions, and they shrivel under other conditions. Schools are not mechanisms, and students are not data points. They're people, living, breathing people with a life to live and a future in front of them, if we can grasp the challenge of it. And schools are much more like organisms than they are like mechanisms. All communities are. They're made up of people reciprocating, and they create a culture. And great leaders know that their job is to create a culture of possibility. I don't know many kids who are ineducable, very few actually, very, very few. But I know plenty of people who pull out of education because it doesn't speak to them. I always want to say to teachers, to school districts, that every country in the world is trying to solve what we do with education. And I think too often we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking back to the 19th century, and we think the answer is all about more testing, specifying standards, screwing it all down. And I think the future lies by looking at the relationships between teachers and students and creating a framework that will facilitate deeper relationships between them. That the real role of school principals and of school superintendents is not command and control, it's climate control. If education doesn't happen in the interactions of students with teachers, it's not happening. And our job is to nurture that relationship as effectively as we can. There was a wonderful quote from, do you know the poet Anais Nin? Anais Nin talked about her own journey, her own creative journey as a poet. And I love that she used this organic metaphor as well. She said, there came a point where the risk of remaining tight in a bud was greater than the risk it took to blossom. And I think we spend a lot of time institutionally in our education systems suppressing talent, inventing reasons for people being disengaged, solving the wrong problem, and not paying proper attention to the diversity of talent in any given school among the teachers, the parents, and the students in the community. And by misunderstanding the problem, prescribing the wrong solution. I think if we reframed it and saw it as an agricultural process, as an organic process, then we'd see a flourishing of human talent on a scale we haven't seen before. We'd have a harvest of innovation and fulfillment that currently evades us. You know, gardeners don't make plants grow. Plants grow themselves. You know, you don't stick the roots on and make the petals. You create conditions for growth, and good gardeners know what the conditions are and bad ones don't. And if you look at a seed and how quickly it becomes a full, flourishing plant, it's a miracle. But calling it a miracle sounds like it's exceptional. It's not really, it's every day with organic systems. I've seen schools which have been failing, turned around in a year because visionary staff came and understood what they had to do. I've seen great schools go down because of other people who came in who didn't understand how this really worked. I see miracles every day in education. Students who have found something in themselves they didn't know was there, and communities have been enriched by a school that brought a power of possibility into the heart of the community itself. And I think, say miracles sound exceptional, but they can be every day, and they are in education. And I do honestly believe this, that if you're in education, you're in the miracle business. And it's a great business to be in. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. We have a special presentation to be made to Sir Ken Robinson by two members of Squaw Valley Institute Kids, SVI Kids. SVI Kids, briefly, is a pilot program that we've been running where a group of 10 students have been diligently studying our key lectures once a quarter. And Carolyn Hamilton, who's sitting right here, has been spearheading that and has been guiding those children several times. The two of those kids who would study Sir Ken Robinson's message tonight are Logan and Sophia, and they would like to present something to you.
Hi, I'm Sophia, and I'm part of the Squaw Valley Kids Institute. This session, we spent 5 weeks, and we worked with community members to help us understand Sir Ken's ideas. So first, we sat together at a table of possibilities, and this was piled with things like fly tying kits, paintbrushes, medical supplies, computers, and we just watched each other play with what we loved. We learned we could play and discuss at the same time. The next week, we met with the Holland Project and learned how kids could bring the arts to kids. The week after that, we met with a woman from Burning Man. She brought us costumes, so we wore space goggles and fluffy hats and wild skirts, while we learned about Burning Man's 10 principles, like radical self-expression, and what Sir Ken might think of them. Then we hosted our own element panel, made up of 12 people we saw in their element. These people told us stories, just like Sir Ken's stories. I noticed that the panelists were humble, happy, had failed at some point, and had a language they spoke within their element. One of my favorite things was how all of us kids saw other kids in their element. I was sitting in math class one day, and a kid next to me was drawing a spaceship. I said, "You're a really good artist." And he said back, "Me?" That made me think that I helped him find his own element. Now Logan has some things he wants to give to Sir Ken.
My name's Logan, and Squaw Valley Kids Institute wants to present Sir Ken Robinson, The Magician's Elephant. And here's a little something I wrote that we combined with Sir Ken and the book that I read. The Magician's Elephant is a book about a young boy, Peter, who has a passion for seeking the truth and his desire to find his long-lost sister, who for 6 years was thought to be dead. Peter's world seems broken, and he feels it cannot be fixed. Where he is not where he belongs. But one day, Peter meets a man with the soul of a poet, who teaches him to consider questions that have no answer, like what if, why not, and could it possibly be? Once Peter starts considering these questions, he realizes that the truth is forever changing. Peter always speaks from his heart. He speaks words that matter, words brave and true. He follows his passion, asks many questions, and finds his truth. And in that truth, he finds what he is looking for. Sir Ken speaks from his heart when he says that creativity is as important as literacy. He speaks words that matter, words that are brave and true. Many people say our education system is broken, and a lot of people think it can't be fixed, almost like it's dead. But we at Squaw Valley Kids Institute want to thank Sir Ken Robinson for wanting to change it and wanting to make our education system better. And for being like Peter, always considering questions that have no answer. What if, why not, and could it possibly be? In finding the answers to these questions, we all might find the truth of what we are looking for in education. Thank you so much, Sir Ken, for your brave words, for inspiring hope, and reminding us that the truth is forever changing. I brought something from our community to give Sir Ken Robinson, and it's a big straw hat.
Okay, so I think maybe we'll do 3 questions. Is that fair to do 3? And I'm going to have Matt here run the mic. So raise your hand and Matt will bring the mic over to you and we'll field a few questions.
How about laughter and learning tonight? If anybody has a question they would like to field for Sir Ken, raise your hand.
Well, why do you think, can I just say how great these kids are? And that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Creating those conditions. Thank you very much. It's fantastic. Thank you. I will. I'm going to give you one now, that's it.
What's your name?
Clark. I want to know what we as individual teachers can do. We're fighting a pretty big system. What can we do to help make this change in education towards more creativity?
I have no idea, really. No, I do. You see, this word system is interesting. By the way, I want to, before we're done, I'm not going to be long, because a lot of you have already had a drink, haven't you? I saw you bringing them in. No, but seriously, and you've got to be somewhere, but I want to show you one and maybe 2 very short videos before, and if there's time. The word system is interesting. You see, there are different types of system. In mechanics, they talk about simple and complicated systems. Like a simple system is a lever. It's a very simple thing. You can you get a kind of exponential lift in energy if you get the thing positioned properly. It's a very simple thing to do. And then you get complicated systems like aeroplanes, which are machines full of simple systems that add up to one great complicated system that reciprocates with itself and to work. Human systems aren't like any of those. Human systems are what biologists would call complex adaptive systems. And what all that really means, if you look at an ecosystem, it's full of all sorts of different entities that depend upon each other for survival and for nutrition. You see, an example that's on my mind at the moment is Kodak. Kodak invented home photography. And the Brownie camera, if you ever check this out, the Brownie camera that was brought out in the early 19th century, sorry, in the early 20th century, was the iPod of its day, the iPad of its day, the iPhone of its day. It was transformative. People couldn't believe how great this device was. Kodak went on to be the biggest photography company in the world. It's dominated the town of Rochester, and they invented digital photography, effectively. They're currently in bankruptcy proceedings. And it's not because people are taking fewer photographs. On the contrary, people are taking more photographs than ever. Irritatingly, more photographs than ever. And sticking them on Facebook. Like, here is a picture of my cappuccino. Fantastic. And here's a picture a couple of minutes later when I've taken a sip from it. This is an important document. So why have they gone broke? Well, because they didn't adapt, they didn't keep pace with change, and they lost contact with their environment. You can describe the death of human systems, human organisms, as being victims of climate change. They just didn't tune into what was happening. And they went out of business. They died. Organizations die. They follow the mortal process of human beings if they're not careful. So when you look at education, it's very complex. There are the interests of students, parents, teachers. There are ideological positions, there are political positions, there are the unions to take account of, there are publishing companies, there are testing companies, architects, it goes on and on and on and on. And all of it reciprocates. And it's very various. It's not homogeneous, it's very heterogeneous. So when we talk about the system, it's important to understand what type of system it is. And the two things I would draw from it are, firstly, that complex adaptive systems do adapt. They change, form, and education is changing. It's not like it's all stuck in one place and there's nothing to be said about it. It is already changing. Look at what's happened with the massive online open courses, MOOCs. Look at how schools are beginning to bring in the new digital technologies into teaching and learning. Look at how many people are moving to homeschooling or unschooling. People make decisions and they move and they start to change things. The reason I mentioned these TED Talks earlier, the talks I've done have been seen in 150 countries. There's a lot of interest in the shift. And it does shift. When I was a kid, when I was a student, everybody smoked. It's true, isn't it? The boomers. We all smoked. I used to smoke giving lectures. I did. And if you said in the early 70s, by the way, smoking will be unacceptable within 10 years, you'd be laughed at. It was. For some people have a cigarette in here now, they're being outraged. So things do change. They do change, and they are changing. So I want to feel comfortable about that. The system is not static. It does evolve, and it evolves through the actions of people. And if enough people get together, it starts to move more quickly. That's what's happening in ecology. There's a big move in the direction now of more sustainable farming practices, for example, and it's about time we have to do it. The other thing I'd say about it is this, that if you're a teacher, or a principal, or an administrator, for the kids that you come into contact with, you are the education system. not somebody else, you are. As soon as the door closes on your classroom, if it does, you're the system. And you can change what you do. You can do things differently. You can introduce new styles of teaching and learning. It's what's happened, for example, at Harvard with this, the flipped classroom. Either a physics professor, Eric Mazur, who read some research some years ago that even kids who do well at Harvard don't really understand a lot of the key concepts, what they really mean. And he thought, well, that can't be true of my students because they're so great and I'm so great. So he did a quiz for some of the students, asked them to give some examples of basic concepts like energy and inertia and force. And it was clear they didn't know what it meant in the real world, they just knew it theoretically. So we got other students in the class to explain to them how it worked, and they got it in a few minutes. So now he doesn't give lectures anymore. Of course, it's a movement spreading in higher education. People are watching the lectures beforehand, but they come to class and they do practical workshops. It's very interesting to me because he said students learn more from each other than from me. And I find it very interesting that Harvard has finally caught up with what every kindergarten teacher always knew. But it is changing, that's my point. And if you change your practice, you change the world for the children that you deal with. And if enough of us change it, then we change the world for everybody. That's my point.
Having a Phil Donahue moment.
Please speak on your opinion on the importance of preschool education.
We'll speak about the importance of preschool education in 140 characters or less. No, I'll tell you, I'll just make a quick comment about it. Children are learning organisms. They learn voraciously, whether you teach them or not. That's the thing, they learn anyway. And in the most remarkable ways, the evidence now, of course, is that from quite an early age, kids are being influenced, even in the womb, by culture. But as soon as they become sensible enough to take stuff in, but they get, their tastes are affected, their sensitivity to music and voices. A good example to me of how voraciously kids learn is how they learn to speak in the early years. If you've got children, you know, I'm sure you do, that you do not teach your children to speak. You couldn't. You couldn't possibly do it. There doesn't come a point where you sit your kids down and say, now look here, there's the situation. You probably noticed your mother and I making all these noises all the time. I'm sure it's all been very confusing for you, but it makes sense to us. And the reason is that all these sounds mean things. And there are nouns, which are the names of things, and you're going to learn about 50,000 of those in the next couple of years. And then there are verbs, which tell us what you can do with them. And then we'll get on to tenses later on, where you start to think about things you might do under certain hypothetical situations. You don't, so you couldn't possibly do it. Kids learn to speak by osmosis. They take it in through their skin. You correct them, you nudge them, you mentor them, you coach them, but they do it on their own. They need to be in a linguistic community. If they grow up where there's no language, they don't learn it. But if they're surrounded by it, they just take it all in. It's true for most things. Kids can do the most amazing things. One of the worries I have with formal education is we infantilize our children. You know what I mean? They're capable of much more than we think they are. But we hold them back to keep them with the program. But there's no doubt that the biggest foundation is what we call early years learning. And in some of the world's highest performing education systems, there's a totally different approach. America, if I can say so, I live here, so I feel comfortable saying it, is doubling down on this industrial method of teaching and learning and becoming obsessed with it. And yet, the country doesn't do well on these international tests, which are designed to kind of take the temperature of children's achievement in particular fields, reading and mathematics, actually. The top performing system in the world for a long time has been Finland. Finland outperforms America consistently on mathematics and reading. The interesting thing about Finland is they have no standardized testing. They have a very broad curriculum. They don't have any. They have a very broad curriculum. They teach the arts, sciences, mathematics, humanities, physical education. They don't encourage competition between schools and league tables. They encourage collaboration across districts so that people work together, which is what a great school district like this can do, where people are supporting each other, not trying to outstrip each other. And they give a very high status to the teaching profession. And they don't start teaching reading and writing too early. They allow kids to play and to learn through play and to learn through connection, social connections. And it works. In America currently, there's a non-graduation rate from public schools of about 30% on average. About 30%. In some parts of the country it's much more, it's about 60% in some parts of the country and in certain communities. Finland doesn't have a dropout rate to speak of, it's very marginal. I was talking to a whole group from Finland recently, and one of the American Union people said, what do you do about the dropout rate? They said, well, we don't have one. Why would you drop out? You know, why would people leave this? This is interesting. You know, it would be wrong to say, wouldn't it? Well, firstly, 1 in 31 Americans currently is in the correctional system. That's the highest proportion of any country on earth. While it wouldn't be true to say if you don't graduate from school, you will end up in jail, what is true is a very high proportion of people in the correctional system didn't graduate from school. It costs about $24,000 a year to keep somebody in jail. It costs about $9,000 to keep them in high school. And every kid who pulls away from school has a reason for pulling out. It's their own circumstance, their own biography. And it's unusual to find kids who really can't be brought back. I was at a meeting recently in LA of alternative education programs. These are programs designed to get kids back into education who dropped out or pulled out. They have certain features. It's very personalized. They have a broad curriculum. They give strong support to teachers. And there are close links to the community. And there's a lot of flexibility in the schedule. And they work. These kids get back into education, start to get back on track. What interests me is these are called alternative education programs. Well, if it was all like that, we wouldn't need an alternative, because this would work. You see, people say to me, well, you can't compare Finland to America. Well, you can, you know, because, I mean, there are 5.5 million people in Finland. Okay, there are over 300 million in America. But most of the work in education happens at the state level. It's organised at the state level and the district level. And there are many states in America with populations lower than 5.5 million. I mean, I think Vermont has fewer than 2 million. Oklahoma has 3.5 million. Some smaller than that. I mean, I was in Wyoming recently. I was the only person there, I think. It was just me. It was me and a driver. We were looking for the switch to turn the lights off when we left. What we can learn from a place like Finland are the principles. And if you apply them, as I hope you're doing here in the school district, they will work. They have to be put into practice, but like all organic process, you have to keep nurturing it. You can't fix it once and for all. You have to keep working at it. It's like that, like gardening, you have to keep doing it. And some you have good years and bad years, but at least you'll be doing the right thing. And I'm saying that preschool, early years to me, is vitally important because it helps to establish social confidence, social networks. It encourages play at the right level. Where it goes wrong is where we start testing kids too early on things they don't need to get to yet. I mean, I said this recently at TED about, you know, I mean, kids are being interviewed now for kindergarten. What? And you know, I'm producing resumes at the age of 3. I mean, you can picture it, can't you? These unimpressed appointment panels. You know, these 3-year-olds in front of them flicking through their resumes. You know, so, this is it. You've been around for 36 months and this is it. Spent the first 6 months breastfeeding, what I can see is. Get with the program. I just think, you know, that although we infantilize kids beyond a certain point, those early years are really vital, and we should let them be children before we expect anything more from them. can I show you a short video? I'm going to, so I don't really care. Answer a quick question. What is that? Thank you very much. So that's been confusing me for weeks. This thing about culture is interesting. There was a study done a while ago of cultural differences in visual perception, in which they compared people from Southeast Asia with people in North America. And the study was simple. They showed them lots and lots of pictures, sat them in front of a computer screen, and the volunteers just had to say what it was they were looking at. Like, what's that? They also had a camera that tracked their eye movement. They were exploring a hypothesis, which is that people from different cultures see different things. Not even see them differently, see different things. And it was kind of borne out by this study. It was featured in a book called The Geography of Thought. It talked about cultural differences. The difference is this: in North America, people typically, seeing a picture like that, and asked what it was, said, as some of you did, it's a tiger. And there is indeed a tiger right there. People in Southeast Asia typically didn't say that. I don't mean they never did, but they just typically did. They typically said things like, it's a jungle with a tiger, or it's a tiger in a jungle, or often as not, it's a jungle, and they didn't mention the tiger at all. Now, I'm not saying they're right and we're wrong, and that's good and this is bad. It's just a difference. It's an important difference, though, isn't it? And the way that they speculated around this in the book was that in Western European cultures, Europe and North America, we have grown up with a passion for individualism. So we always tend to look at what we think is the subject of the picture, and we screen the background out. So we look at the tiger, we don't look at the surrounds. Whereas in Southeast Asian cultures, they're much more nuanced in their sense of social relationships and connections and patterns of responsibility. So they tend to look at the whole thing. You see it in European art, where there's a big history of portraiture, these kind of heroic figures in the middle. Less so in Asian art, and of course in Islamic art they don't represent the figure at all. So it's just a difference. But it's also interesting because of course it is a tiger in the jungle. It's not a tiger in the back of your car or a tiger in your sitting room. But if there are problems attached to what we look at which are affected by culture, how much more imbued are these attitudes we take for granted when it comes to things like intelligence, or talent? And that's what we were talking about in the group over there. I mean, the book I did, The Element, is about the diversity of talent and when talent meets passion. And you can tell when you're in your element because your life takes on a different course. If you're in your element, you get energy from what you do. It doesn't take it from you. You must have found that. There's a difference between spiritual energy and physical energy. That at the end of a week doing something you don't care for, you can be physically fine but down and reaching for a bottle of spirits. But if you're doing something you love to do, the time passes differently. You can be physically exhausted but uplifted by it. It's a spiritual thing, I mean, with a small s. So it's why I say that a lot of things in education we take for granted about creativity and intelligence turn out not to be true. They're culturally inflected, and if we can get past that and go back to what's really at issue, then we'll see something different. One of the things that releases creativity is the questions we ask and how we put them. This is a lovely thing from a school in Israel, where a teacher, I just saw this and I thought you'd be interested in it. A teacher just conducted a classroom experiment on the difference a question makes. I'll just play it for you, it takes a couple of minutes, it explains itself. If you've got another 3 minutes, I really want to show you this. I just came across it recently, and I just need to flick through some other slides to get to it, which we needn't worry about. Ignore all these other things. Just imagine the wonderful things we would have talked about if we'd done this. But this is I want to show you, it's a short, like 3 or 4 minutes. It's a trailer for a project in Paraguay. maybe the Kids Institute should connect with this initiative on Facebook. I think they'd love to know what you're doing. You know, beauty grows in the most unlikely places if we nurture creativity. So just think what we'd achieve if we really paid attention. Thank you.